Start the recording.
It's not gonna work.
Now you're all being recorded. We'll start sharing the screen. All right, well, I'll get this show on the road because everybody doesn't want to stay late tonight. So this is part 2 of Greece, as you can see by the slide. And there'll probably be one more because there's just so many Greek gods and there's so much written history about it. And there's so many good connections to be made with what we see as far as symbolism in the Bible. So it feels like it's worthwhile kind of hanging around this for a little bit and playing with it, because I was also part of the thing is I was able to find some articles written by Reverend Odener back over 100 years ago that go through a lot of the symbolism, and he gives his take on what he thinks all of this stuff means, and some of it's fairly interesting. So anyway, with that in mind, let's take a look at some Greek gods and goddesses. If I can get the computer to cooperate. Come on, computer. There we go. So starting, just kind of a reminder of how we started this, and that, you know, this red area is representing the spread of the Indo-European language. So it starts in the red, and as it goes further east and west, we also see the importation of other things Indo-European. And of course, Greece is, you know, right over here. So we're right in the hot spot of all this originating. And as we look at Hestia, or Vesta in Latin, she is the goddess of that first Olympian generation. She's the eldest daughter of the Titans Rhea and Kronos, and sister to Chiron, Demeter, Hades, Hera, Poseidon, and Zeus. Immediately after their birth, Cronus swallowed all his children. Hestia was the first to be swallowed, except the last and the youngest, Zeus. Yeah. Instead, Zeus was forced Cronus to disgorge his siblings and led them in a war against their father and the other Titans. As first to be devoured and the last to be yielded up again, Hestia is both the eldest and the youngest daughter. Hestia rejected the marriage suits of Poseidon and Apollo and swore herself to perpetual virginity. So we did. That's right. That's right. Poseidon is a sibling, and yes, she rejected marriage to him. Good for her, huh? Yeah. So we talked a little bit about this whole Cronus swallowing the children last time, and it was all about this prophecy of, you know, trying to not be overthrown. You know, he's trying to hold on to his power, so if he eats the children, he can prevent them from taking over, which didn't exactly work out for him. But with Hestia and this, you know, the key thing here for her is we see that she's swearing herself to virginity. And so what Odener writes is that as the supreme representative of celestial good, so she is this highest level of good, superior to celestial truth, she was to be conjoined to no inferior degrees of finite truth. That's why she didn't marry Apollo or anybody else, because she is not going to lower her spiritual standing. So her virgin heart was an altar devoted exclusively to the sacred fire of celestial love, the love of the Lord. So, Susie, you're not as familiar with this as perhaps some of the others, but in Swedenborg's terminology, when he says celestial, it's his way of saying highest, and it's directed towards the Lord. So in his words, you know, celestial love directed to the Lord, the spiritual love is directed to the neighbor, and the natural love is directed towards just obedience, just doing what the right thing is you're told. So whenever you see that, you just think celestial, thinking, okay, this is directed towards the Lord himself. So that's why Odener here points out, you know, in the proper sense, those are virgins who are in love with the Lord. That is the celestial, and those who are in the affection of good. The celestial church, meaning love towards the neighbor from a love to the Lord, is likened to a virgin. So the idea here is you're carrying some of that symbolism along here in this picture of Hestia. here's the temple for Hestia. And there aren't many statues of her. You don't find paintings of her. And the ones you do are modern. They're not of the ancient origins. This at her temple, no images of her. Can you imagine that? Although I guess if you think about it, if you go to our church, you don't find the pictures of the Lord, do you? But it seems like in ancient times they liked having their images of people, or of their deities, I should say, and that was the case with Hestia. So it's the altar with its sacred flame that evokes her presence. And her chief temple never contained her image. And the chief characteristics of her images are those of simplicity, tranquility, and repose. The main thing here,
Did you say she corresponds to celestial what? Celestial
good,
what?
good. Well, love, yeah.
Flame. The flame is what
Yeah. Go ahead, roll with that.
I'm just saying, the altar and its sacred flame and love and good.
Yeah, I'm picking up what you're putting down. We're going to run with that. I'm glad you brought that up. Yes, the Hestia flame is an important symbol to pick up on. And we're going to go on with that because here we say, this is what Odner writes. He says, the altar to Hestia was the central shrine of every city and village in Greece and Italy. And the safety of the city was regarded as depending upon the conservation of the sacred fire, which must be perpetually burning there. This custom has been explained by the interpreters of the evolutionist school as originating in the preciousness of fire and the difficulty of producing it, rubbing two sticks together, and the consequent political economy of having a central fire perpetually burning for the accommodation of all the households. But in the new church, this does not explain the reason for the still more difficult custom of carrying fire over land and sea from the sacred fire in the mother city, where the new colony was founded. It is not evident that something more than a mere economy was involved, and that there was a sentiment, a religious feeling in regard to fire, which can be explained only by the correspondence of fire as meaning love, and in this connection, the supreme of all loves, the love of the Lord, upon which depends all other loves. Love of the church, the love of the country, love of community, and of the domestic bonds. So, yes. Mr. Odner, Reverend Odner, agrees and picks up on that. And it makes sense, right? Love is the foundation of all your things. And so you have one of your chief deities presents that. Yeah. So there's Hestia.
Well, you say that it makes sense and logical and all that, but I'd argue that it goes back far enough that it's not about logic. It's just about love. That's their love. It's the Lord.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
I was just thinking about the Olympic flame. What's is there any, there wouldn't be this sort of reasoning as that, I wouldn't think.
Surely.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of Olympic flame, but yeah, because I mean,
that's kept burning constantly, and when it travels the world before the Olympics, it's the same flame that's kept burning as it travels.
When did these Olympics start? I mean, they were ancient.
1924, I think it was before 18 something, wasn't it? There was some French guy.
Yeah.
It hasn't been going. The modern Olympics is just over 100 years
Yeah,
old.
right. Okay.
Yeah. Huh, but interesting though, because it does have that same characteristic.
But I like my father's mob with the Greeks, was my dad's mob, when the Olympics were on. If they had big wars and there was Olympic Games, that's it, war's finished. That's right, Olympic Games are on, wars are over, time out, come on, let's go.
I got more important things to do.
Yeah, we've got the Olympics, mate.
All right, well, so there is Hestia. And I want to get back to this guy, Deus Pater. You may recall that he was reported to be the original all-father of the gods. When we looked at Sumeria. This was their chief deity. And we looked at this little bit here and said, well, we'll just read it. He says, the ancestors of the Indo-European peoples looked at the sky and saw a father, a cosmic patriarch with authority over the realm of daylight. Many Indo-European pantheons contain gods associated with the sky that have preeminence among other gods. The Greeks had Zeus, the Romans had Jupiter, and Hinduism, Deus had a similar role as Zeus. Scholars have used these deities to attempt to reconstruct the original sky god of the Proto-Indo-European religion, Deus. So I bring this up because we were using Deus Pater and kind of drawing this out, saying, well, does this perhaps, if you say this word properly, does Deus become Zeus? If you understand all the etymology of it, is Zeus just a permutation of Deus? And when we look at the writings, we can start to think, well, maybe not. This is what TCR 9 says about the Greek gods. It says, Jehovah, which he named himself anew for the Jews, means the highest and only being, the origin of everything that exists and occurs in the universe. People in the pre-classical period acknowledged Jove as the highest god, perhaps so named from Jehovah, and deified many others who made up his court. In the age that followed, however, sages like Plato and Aristotle admitted that other Olympians were not gods, but different properties, qualities, and attributes of the one god, called gods because there was divinity in each of them. So that's TCR. And then we get this from Oedner. He says, wouldn't it be reasonable to suppose that the Sanskrit Deus is itself derived from Jehovah? Moreover, it is an incontestable fact that the names of many, if not most of the Greek divinities are derived not from Sanskrit, but directly from the Hebrew, through the Phoenicians, as for instance, Halos from El, Apollo from Habal, Astarte from Ashtoreth, Bacchus from Bacchus, Adonis from Adonai, and etc. And in the Assyrio-Babylonian pantheon, we find as the supreme god Ea or Hea, who under the name of Ea, is represented as holding a sheaf of thunderbolts. It seems more likely, therefore, that Jupiter or Jopater was derived from Ivapater, Jehovah the Father, rather than from Deus. And it is also admitted that by the philologist that the Latin Jove in a more ancient Umbrian dialect is Luv, which is almost identical with the sacred Hebrew name. So that's something I have never heard before, that Zeus comes from the Hebrew in that way. Of course, it's speculation on Oedner's part. We don't really know it to be true, but maybe. If we're starting with this basic idea that the ancient church worshipped one God and his name was Jehovah, and it starts with these Indo-Europeans is where that comes from. Maybe there's something to be said there. The only kind of qualm I guess I have with it is, the biblical history, like it only starts, around 2000 BC. The Jews don't really, Abraham's not called until around then. The Greek gods, these things are happening more recent than to that. But it kind of makes it hard to stretch that you're getting the Greeks importing from Canaan at that time. So I don't know. I mean, I like what he's trying to do here, but I'm not sure that I buy it.
Maybe just all come from one source. Not that it's coming from Canaan or Hebrew specifically. It's all coming from the Lord and
Right.
his name comes through.
Yep. Well, that's true. He does say it's coming from the Phoenicians, not directly from Hebrew. So,
And the part that surprises me is that like this dios, Sanskrit dios,
mhm.
there's no mention of like the Latin deus. To me, it's all just from, I mean, dios would come from God, deus, D-E-U-S. There's no mention of that.
Well, the Latin would have been newer than the Sanskrit.
Okay. True that.
That's I think the Latin comes from the Sanskrit, not the other way
Oh,
around.
okay.
So anyway, it's a potential connection there. And what I want to show you here are some images of Zeus, because what we want to do next is take a look at some of the symbolism that we see in these traditional images of Zeus. And so you have this girl over here, you've got an eagle. Now I'll show you the next one. There's some stuff over by his feet. So once again, you got the eagle and you got the rod or scepter. So this picture's got the eagle. Obviously, this picture's a newer version. You can tell that. But this next one is like the classic image of Zeus. This is, pretty doggone old. 0 AD-ish kind of time frame, I believe. Sorry?
But it just says that they're AC 455.
AC 455. Where do you see that?
Right.
Oh yeah, well that's not about the.
Okay.
That's Arcana Celestia.
Oh.
Right.
Yeah, sorry.
So what you see is that there's the oak tree, there's the thunderbolts, there's the eagle again. He's got the world here, and a lot of these elements are found in the ancient depictions of Zeus. And so if we go through those elements, yes, the oak signifies eternity. So there's a symbol there. The eagle signifies the rational because it flies high from aloft and takes a wide view of the things which are below. So that's why you see an eagle pictured with Zeus. The flying eagle signifies the appearance of the divine protection and providence in ultimates as to intelligence, as to clear-sightedness. Lightnings and thunders in the word signify divine truth as to enlightenment and understanding. And the voices of thunders are divine truths which illustrate and perfect those who are in heaven and terrify and devastate those who are in hell. So let's see if I can make this. I was trying to move you guys out of the. The point is that you have all this symbolism packed into a picture of Zeus that lines up with what biblical symbolism would say as well. Here you have this king of the gods, as it were, and what does he have? Rational, wide view of things, of all things. The oak, about the eternity, he's around forever. And what does God work with? Lightning and thunder, right? Mount Sinai, there's lightning and thunder when he visits Moses because, well, the divine truth is terrifying to people who are in evil. So yeah, we just see more of the same kind of thing where the Greeks had some sort of clue into the symbolism that existed at that time. If you move off of Zeus into Hera, so Hera is the wife and sister of Zeus, the queen of Olympus and the Olympian goddess of marriage. As such, she is also the deity most associated with family and the welfare of women and children. Her marriage, however, was an unhappy one, since Zeus had numerous affairs. Jealous and vengeful, Hera made sure to give each of his consorts some hard time. Before I moved on to Hera, I should have asked any comments on Zeus. And I'm not that anybody wanted to say anything, but. All right.
Oh, if it is, is he really the right guy?
Yes, Zeus's stock has suddenly gone down, huh? But, you know, hang on to that because we're going to have some comments about that in a minute as we go through Hera. And also notice Hera, you know, she's got, you can't really see what's in this hand from this, but I'm going to tell you it's a pomegranate seeds. She's got her rod here. And you'll see this. So here's Zeus and Hera together. The marriage of Hera with Zeus was regarded by the ancients as by eminence of the hero schemes, the sacred marriage, or as was termed in the writings, between the heavenly marriage between the Lord and the church. So the idea, yes, even though Zeus had these affairs, that there's this marriage between the Lord and the church that's being depicted here. And since all conjugal love flows from this heavenly marriage, Hera, as bride and wife of her divine husband, was regarded as the great guardian deity of the sanctity of marriage, and as the patroness and protector of all the married women. So, right, she's got a few things on her plate. You don't see her with all her stuff in this picture, but here you can see she's got that pomegranate. So here we look at some of the symbolism that's generally depicted of Hera. So she's got the flowing robes with a diadem on her brow. She holds a scepter in one hand and a pomegranate in the other. The diadem is about intelligence that comes with truth. The scepter, that's power and royalty. The pomegranate, on account of its multitude of seeds, was regarded as the symbol of marriage and the seminary of the human race. It signifies also the cognitions or thoughts and perceptions of good and truth, and likewise the spiritual sight of an orderly mind, well filled with living truths, because this fruit is pellucid even to the center. I don't know what pellucid means.
Pellucid.
Yeah, but that's what TCR calls it. So pellucid, I would imagine, has something to do with about the number of seeds. You can look it up for us? Great. But, you know, again, this is, you know, here she is holding a pomegranate. She's this symbol of marriage. And it's only in the writings that Swedenborg has that we talk about a pomegranate as a symbol of fertility and marriage. You know, so, you know, what other text are you going to find that's going to make sense of why she's holding a pomegranate and why it's no.
Admitting the passage of light, transparent or translucent, clear in style or meaning, transparent.
Huh.
So filled with fruit, this fruit is clear, even to the center. Or they're red.
Yeah, that's
Well,
kind of odd.
yeah, it's not the color. I think it's that the seeds are the whole thing. Like,
Allowing the maximum passage of light as glass.
I guess the fruit is, if you think about the seeds surrounded by the juicy fruit part, the juicy
Yeah.
fruit part is transparent. That part is transparent.
Let's see what TCR via Rose says. We can find pomegranate.
That does have a correspondence.
Yeah, here we go. Just as a pomegranate is translucent all the way to the center where the seeds are stored.
We'll have to get a pomegranate and come. We're going to do that.
Yeah.
Cut it right off.
The fruit, the edible part itself is translucent. The red part around the seed
Huh.
is translucent, I would
Is
say.
it? Okay.
Not the off-white stuff, yeah, not the skin, not the seed itself, but the part that we eat around the seed. I mean, that's a very small part, but the fruit itself is made up of a lot of them, yeah, it's a lot of them.
Okay.
It's the only connection I can think of.
All right. Well, we'll go with that.
Yeah, come on.
What I want to talk about was the sister and wife business, because she is Zeus's sister and wife. And we have this come up with Abram and Sarah. there are two instances in Genesis where Abram says, "This is my sister." And he's trying to maneuver so that they don't take his wife as their own. And then something happens where, like, the Lord intervenes on behalf of the other person and says, "Don't take this man's wife." And the guy goes to Abram and says, "Why did you tell me she was your wife? I almost committed adultery, this terrible evil. Why didn't you tell me?" He said, "Well, I thought you might, kill me and take her," or something like that. But the writings go through a process of explaining, well, why would he do this? What's the spiritual meaning behind this? And it says that there are two states of knowing truth that the Lord himself went through in his life on earth, especially in his childhood. And that the lesser relationship, Sarah as sister, pictures mere intellectual truth. And the more genuine relationship, Sarah as wife, pictures divine truth. So when we see this kind of craziness of Zeus marrying his sister, is it possible that they're ripping off the Bible and saying, well, Abram married his sister, and there's other instances in the Bible where somebody marries their sister. Abram's, I think, the most clear one where you have a sister and a wife, and it's this actually plays out in some meaningful way. But perhaps the Greeks were onto this. If we look at some of Zeus's lovers, we see some other biblical parallels. Here's just a story about one of them. Danae was a daughter of King Acrisius. At the time, she was childless, and the king asked the oracle of Delphi if this would change. The oracle announced to him that he would never have a son, but his daughter would, and that he would be killed by his daughter's son. So Acrisius shut poor Danae up in a bronze chamber, who was buried in this tomb, never to see the light again. However, Zeus desired her and came to her in the form of golden rain, which streamed in through the roof of the subterranean chamber and down into her womb. Soon after, their child Perseus was born, and of course, a couple of years later, he killed King Acrisius, accidentally but efficiently. So, right. And when we look at Zeus's affairs, a lot of them have this kind of format where Zeus is interested in this woman, and he comes to her in some other form, manages to pull it off, and it seems all kind of weird. It all kind of makes no sense to us. But this is what Odiner writes about Zeus's disguises. He says, when the church specific becomes perverted, as when June becomes a jealous and rebellious wife, the Lord comes with a new divine message to those Gentile nations in which there remains some simple and innocent love of the truth. And in their virgin soil, he then implants the seeds of a new, genuine church. But when thus coming with a new revelation, he cannot at first manifest himself such as he really is, as the divine truth itself, but must necessarily clothe himself in various appearances of external good and truth, accommodating the simple states of the receptive Gentiles. These appearances are represented by the various disguises of Jove in approaching the earthly maidens who are the objects of his love. So he's saying that Zeus's disguises are a picture of how, when the God-church relationship goes bad, God comes to new people in new forms. And you can think of this in the Christian church terms, right? Christian church goes bad in the 300 BC or so is kind of when Swedenborg marks Christian church going bad. And so the Lord reveals to Muhammad, right? He appears in a new form. That's one of Zeus's disguises, as it were. and accommodates what he says to that group of people. So it's a similar story, just done a different way. And it's the same thing even if you go back to Abram, right? God appears to Abram, and Abram thinks he's El Shaddai. He's not, but he accommodates to him and accommodates many things to him. Furthermore, and for those maidens, there's generally began a period of tribulation and persecution inflicted by the jealous junior Hera, by which is represented the persecutions and temptations which the new church must suffer from the old perverted church, right? So it's a prediction that, whenever a new revelation comes along, there's going to be trouble from the old. And we see that with our church, right? Traditional Christians think that we are the heretics. But what I find interesting about this also is, you can look at the David and Bathsheba story. Right? Zeus desires these people, and that's what we see with David. David desires Bathsheba. And when you look at other biblical people, right, polygamy is just everywhere, right? Zeus is not the only polygamist. Everybody who's somebody in Scripture is basically a polygamist. And the writings tell us a few things about polygamy. It says when their descendants fell away from being internal men and became external, they began to marry several wives. The two wives of Jacob, Leah representing the external church, and Rachel the internal. These churches, although they appear like two, are yet only one. Wives in general are aspects of good. So the idea that you have multiple wives just means that you have many different aspects of good in your life. I don't think that would work out for me. But I guess it means I'm an internal man. It's only when I become external that I get married, get many wives. So.
Or you are ruled by external rules.
I'm bound by external rules. I'm going to go with I'm an internal man.
Okay.
Yeah, we're going to go with that. That's how we're going to paint that one. But Solomon had lots of wives, and that gets a lot of press as far as modern people are concerned. They go, oh, that's not good. But Odiner says even modern naturalistic interpreters recognize that Zeus's infidelities lose all their grossness if we recognize them as allegories which typify the great generative power of the universe, displaying itself in a variety of ways. How much more so then when we come to see that the plural connections of Zeus, like the polygamous marriages of the patriarchs and kings in the Old Testament, could represent or typify the relations of the one all-loving God with the various forms of religious faith as existing among different Gentile races. And he's taking this from the book Divine Providence, where Swedenborg says, look, Solomon's many wives represent that God finds a way to connect with every different race, country that exists. And it's a picture of the variety in which God connects to people and reveals himself. And so while Solomon does get drawn astray by these foreign wives, it's not actually all a bad thing, because it's the diversity of it all. So the idea here is that Zeus's his many wives are showing the same kind of thing, perhaps. As you go through the stories, I mean, there's plenty of parallels to the Bible. So either people were not very original in their writing, they couldn't think of any better ideas, or they just thought there was something deeper in here that could be had. If we move away from Zeus, we get to Poseidon. I actually enjoyed studying Poseidon the most out of all these ones for tonight.
I had a hard time finding a picture for the Facebook page before we updated. Didn't have this self-showing. Trying to keep it family friendly.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay. Yeah, I noticed that with all the Greek goddesses, they are all topless. That was just the way it was going to be. Poseidon is represented as a strong and majestic of aspect, wearing a crown of seaweeds, holding in his hand the trident or three-pronged scepter, right? That's when we think of Poseidon as the scepter. Seated beside his wife, Amphitrite, in a chariot made of glistening seashells, he is drawn over the waters by fiery steeds, and in his wake follows a host of trumpeting tritons and nereids, graceful sea nymphs, gambling dolphins, and other creatures of the sea. So there is your traditional picture of Poseidon. Poseidon represents spiritual truth, accommodated to the natural apprehension of man. All collections of water, whether in the forms of fountains, rivers, or lakes, correspond to collections of truth in the natural mind of man or the church in general. So yeah, you got to have a sea god, right? The trident, being a scepter, signifies the power of divine truth. But being the scepter of Poseidon, having three prongs, it signifies the power of divine truth, the ultimates of the word, in which 3 degrees of truth, celestial, spiritual, natural, are all together simultaneously, each powerful, each rational, and pointed. The horse is always and especially associated with Poseidon, and he himself even bore the surname of Horse Poseidon. He is said to have created the first horse by striking the ground with the trident. So, I mean, that all sounds pretty reasonable as far as how the writings would interpret some of these things. Yeah, the horse is your intellectual understanding. So the idea is that he's very smart, powerful, in his rational mind. Yeah, and that trident is showing that he has power within all the realms, right? But I can't get past why it was that a sea god has chariots and horses. Come on, that doesn't make any sense at all.
Amphibious.
Yeah, and wasn't there something about their fiery horses? Was it the last one or this one? There's something about fire, I thought.
Fiery steed.
Yeah, fiery. That fire and water just don't go well together. Nor do horses and nor do chariots go well with water. So it seemed kind of crazy. So here we go. This is again Odiner. He says, the modern interpreters confess that it is difficult to give reason for this connection of Neptune or Poseidon with the horse, especially in view of the well-known aversion of sailors to the use of this animal. Various reasons are given, as that the horse was first introduced on board to a ship into Greece, or that the horse is on land what a ship is to the sea. As Poseidon therefore represents the divine truth in the natural sense of the word in general, his chariot signifies doctrine by which this truth is conveyed. His horse, the understanding of the word and the letter, and the same is signified in the prophet who says of Jehovah, thou didst walk with thine horses through the sea, through the heap of the great waters. So again, the Greeks are ripping off the Bible, and
Coming from the same place.
yeah, but so the chariot signifies the doctrine, so which is truth is conveyed. So, and I was trying to go through my own mind as to what that means. All right, so doctrine is, the structure. It's the fundamental belief, right? So in an example, like in the New Church theology, the doctrine is that God loves everybody all the time, right? So when you read things in the Bible that say God was angry, your doctrine, God loves everybody all the time, is a light to that passage. Your doctrine is telling you, okay, how should I understand this passage if we know that God loves everybody all the time? Oh, well, it's an appearance, or this is how men feel when they go against God, that God hates them. This doctrine is a light. So it's a light to my feet and a lamp to my path, something like that. Mm-hmm. So in this case of Poseidon, right, so he is divine truth, so truth that comes from God. And this chariot, it's saying that this truth from God is being conveyed to us in a way that we can understand it. And yet we have to have this basic understanding of doctrine to go with it. So Poseidon's got this, it's a very complex image, quite honestly. And Zeus was a lot simpler to understand. But I think the idea here is important that, I think the word doctrine gets thrown around a lot in church talks. And I don't think we understand how important it is to have it. Like if you don't have a structure of how you understand things, you're going to get lost. How do you explain why bad things happen to good people? Why do good things happen to bad people? If you don't have doctrine, if you don't have a system of understanding, a foundation, as it were, the higher realms of truth are going to be inaccessible to you. So Poseidon gives us that. Pegasus. All right. Pegasus was capable of creating water streams wherever he'd struck his hoof. At least two famous springs in Greece, both named Hippocrene, were widely believed as to have been issued forth by Pegasus's hoof. The more famous one of the two was located on Mount Helicon, the sacred abode of the Muses. Its waters, when drunk, enthused poets with inspiration and creativeness. And when they described the birth of the sciences from the intellectual, they pictured a flying horse, which with his hoof broke open a fountain, which preceded the virgins who are the sciences, the Muses. So that column on the right clearly is from the writings, from Oedner. It's not a direct quote, but that's how he understands it, that the Greeks see the Pegasus as a mechanism that breaks into sciences. And we have that from the Greek philosophers. They broke into sciences, and so the Pegasus was their symbol of how they tap into that. And Pegasus was created by Poseidon. So you have this sea god, this master of truth, and he creates the Pegasus, which gives them access to the sciences. Yeah. Comments?
I was just thinking about the springs, and so water and truth, and the horse being understanding, and the wings flying and lofty thoughts or something.
Yeah, right. Kind of birds. So yeah, because birds are about, higher level thoughts. So a horse, it's intellectual ability that has the ability to reach high, something like that. But yeah. And we're nearing the end here. Amphitrite. Amphitrite? Yeah. She looks like all the other goddesses, if you ask me. But the key is in the symbolism here, some of the details. The wife of Poseidon, beautiful Amphitrite, whose graceful green hair encircles the earth, is said by some to personify the calm and sunlit aspect of the sea. To others, she signifies the shore, which everywhere embraces the ocean. To us, she stands rather for the love of the word in general, as her handmaids, the water nymphs, oceanides, nereides, naiads, etc., certainly signify the affections of the truths of the word.
She loves Poseidon. She loves.
There you go. There you go. She loves Poseidon. She loves the truth. That's a simple way of saying it, right? Graceful green hair encircles the earth.
The green hair, Poseidon apparently had hair of seaweed, which I didn't realize, but they're consistent that way.
Yep. Yeah. They seem like they're a match made for each other.
Yeah, circle hair. That's long hair.
It is. Well, and if you go along with the idea that wives are, representing an affection for the truth, but they themselves are a loving, because they're a female. So encircling the earth is a loving, embrace. And what does she love? Yes, as you say, she loves Poseidon. So, it kind of stacks up pretty well.
She has like rings on tiny fish.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, they must be.
Tiny, but
Yeah.
features.
So we got one more. No, that was it. No, that was it. So yeah, we'll call it here. That way we have a nice short evening to go with our weather. It's later than I thought. Anyway, questions, thoughts, concerns, observations?
Aphrodite, I think it's.
F.
I've never heard of it, but I don't know. I think that's the way to say it.
There's Aphrodite, that's a different one.
Yeah, that's Aphrodite. I think so. I've sort of heard it. I studied it when I was young. It's quite interesting.
So, yeah, I mean, it just seems to me that there's too much of the symbolism that matches between these gods or this pantheon of gods and what we see in biblical stuff. And there's just too much of it that there has to be some sort of meaning. The Greeks, for all their history for their ancient history, that's what they're about. Seeing something deeper and probing into the deeper mysteries. The philosophers. They weren't worried about how they were going to sell more widgets. They were trying to understand the meaning of life and stuff like that. So the idea that they baked in deeper meanings to their mythology it doesn't seem like it's very hard to believe. But how did they get the same symbols as the Bible? Well, maybe there's this common source that it comes from this Indo-European heritage, this ancient church heritage, as Swedenborg would call it, that just gets passed on down. And Swedenborg certainly asserts that there's that connection between the ancient church and the Greeks. And the more you start looking at the details of these things, you can start to say, that adds up.
Yeah, it's incredible. There's a lot of words that we use that they've traced back to Sanskrit as well. Like when they say the sutras, you heard that when they say their incarnations, and that's what they call it. They say their sutras.
Yep.
And sutra means to bind.
To bind.
Like
Sutras.
Yeah.
And I remember my yoga teacher, I can't remember the other ones, but like you said, there must have been a common source there somewhere. It must have come from somewhere. And I think I had that with you. They found these caves in where our ancestors lived in Europe, and they had the symbols on the cave because they used to go in there and meditate. I'm talking about pre-Bronze Age. I'm talking about like before that. But there was a cave here, and there's a cave right over in Siberia, right near Japan.
Okay.
The same symbols were on the wall.
Huh.
The same symbols were on the wall because they must have the way that the human brain works when they go into. It's incredible. It's just.
Yeah, Todd, you keep referring to common source and talking about the Indo-European, et cetera. I feel like that, to me anyways, looking at it from a very natural perspective, and that the common source is the Lord and the inspiration that they're all getting, whether they're in wherever that was you said, or
right.
That's it.
If you go back far enough, they all had direct connection with the Lord.
Why didn't I'm not questioning you. But why didn't the Lord? Why the Lord didn't come then instead of 2,000 years ago? When He spoke to Abraham,
They didn't need it as badly back then.
There you go. Yeah.
He came when he came because humanity needed him to come because it was on the brink of catastrophe or something.
Yeah, well, that's it.
The phrase that I see in the Bible is that the the sin of the people did not reach its fullness.
Right, I remember that, yeah.
So it's like, it's
The Lord
whatever.
said, that's it, I've got to come and talk to you.
Yeah, he does wait till the last second, and it seems to be a matter of letting the evil have their freedom as well as letting the good have their choices as well. So that, like the children of Israel couldn't go into Canaan like when he called Abram at the beginning because, the sin of the Amorites or somebody hadn't reached their conclusion. And so there seems to always be a lag. But yeah, I know what you mean. I'm not questioning you, but
Where was I when he created the universe? I remember you told me that. I like that. Because the heroes.
Jews got themselves into all sorts of trouble by creating multiple gods.
Yeah.
Greeks.
Well, the Jews didn't create multiple gods. They went after gods of other nations.
So was that, did you say? They went,
Went after God.
They-
of other nations.
Yeah.
other nations, I see, yeah.
They didn't create Baal and
No,
those
that's
crew.
already there.
Yeah, they just followed after it. Yeah. Hey, what you doing? What's that? All right. Anything from anybody else? No? Okay. Well, fair enough. We'll call it there. And now I will mention that we're going to reconvene next week. We're going to have class 2 weeks in a row to kind of reset some things around the calendar. And yeah, so we have our dinner at 7, class at 8. And we'll see you then.
Thank you very much, Todd.
You bet.
Thank you.
Good night, all.
Night.
See you, mate. See you Sunday.
Good night.